You close your eyes and try to remember the last time you felt something real. Not an automatic reaction, not a forced smile to fulfill social protocol, but a genuine feeling that struck you like lightning and reminded you that you were alive. The silence of the response is deafening. You live, breathe, work, eat, sleep. Fulfill your daily obligations with mechanical precision that would impress any supervisor. But it's as if you're watching your own life through thick, fogged glass where everything seems distant and colorless. People around you talk about their emotions as if they're speaking of a foreign country you've never visited, and you nod politely, pretending to understand the geography of this mysterious place called emotional life. They describe joys as if they were lush landscapes, sorrows as if they were purifying storms, anger as if they were fires that warm in winter. But inside, there exists a void so deep that not even the echo of your own words can reach the bottom. It's a strange and disturbing sensation, being biologically functional but existentially absent. You woke up one morning and discovered you had become a stranger in your own life, walking through the corridors of existence like a ghost who forgot he died, executing tasks with technical perfection but unable to remember why they matter. Franz Kafka intimately knew this sensation of being alive without living. He once wrote, "I am like a cage in search of a bird." This phrase resonates with painful truth because it perfectly captures what it feels like to be an empty structure, waiting for something to give meaning to the form, but without knowing exactly what that something is. Kafka lived in a world where emotions seemed to have been drained, where each day stretched before him like a silent tribunal judging his capacity to feel. He understood that there exists an abyssal difference between being biologically alive and being existentially present in one's own life. In his diaries, he described entire days that passed like ghosts, where he performed all necessary activities but felt as if he were observing life through a shop window, always on the outside of real experience. Kafka understood that emotional numbness wasn't laziness or lack of will, but an organism's response to a world that had become emotionally unbearable to inhabit fully. He perceived that sometimes the soul retreats to safer places, leaving only an operational version of ourselves to deal with external demands. It was as if our emotional essence entered hibernation, preserving energy for a spring that never seemed to come. The most disturbing question isn't why you stopped feeling, but when exactly it happened. Was it gradual, like dusk stealing light without us noticing the exact moment when day becomes night? Or was it sudden, like a switch someone turned off inside your chest while you slept? Perhaps it began as an intelligent and necessary survival strategy. The modern world bombards us with so much stimulation, so much information, so much vicarious suffering transmitted in real time, that our emotional system simply decided to disconnect to avoid overload. It's as if your soul had installed a protective fuse that burned out to prevent a larger fire. You might have noticed the first signs when you began watching sad movies without crying, or when you received news that should have affected you but you processed only intellectually. Perhaps you realized you were responding to, "How are you?" questions with automatic answers that didn't correspond to any real internal state. Or when you realized there had been weeks when your emotions seemed to be in airplane mode, technically functioning but without connection to anything. The most frightening part is that this process can be so silent that when we finally perceive it, we're already far from the emotional shore, adrift in the sea of indifference, unable to remember exactly when we stopped rowing toward life. Mariana discovered this at 35, sitting at the breakfast table looking at her husband and 2 children. They were chatting animatedly about weekend plans, their voices blending like background noise. She bit into bread with jam and realized she couldn't distinguish the taste. It wasn't that the bread was tasteless, it was that she had lost the capacity to savor. In that moment, she understood that for months, perhaps years, she had been functioning on autopilot. She would wake at 6 in the morning, prepare coffee, wake the children, work 8 hours in an office where she pretended interest in spreadsheets and meetings, return home, prepare dinner, help with homework, put the kids to bed, watch television with her husband without really seeing anything, sleep and start over. Each day was a perfect copy of the previous one, executed with robotic efficiency. She smiled when necessary, responded adequately to questions, participated in family conversations, but it was as if she were executing a very well-written program, not living a life. The discovery frightened her less than it should have, And it was this very indifference to her own discovery that made her understand the depth of the problem. It was like discovering she had lost her sight, but not caring about the fact that she could no longer see colors. This indifference to her own indifference was the moment when Mariana realized she needed to find her way back to herself. Emotional numbness isn't laziness of the soul, nor lack of will. It's a sophisticated response from our nervous system to a world that has become excessively complex to be processed emotionally in a healthy way. When we're constantly exposed to vicarious traumas through social media, when we need to manage superficial but demanding relationships at work, when we're pressured to be productive in all dimensions of existence without ever having time to simply be, our capacity to feel genuinely becomes overloaded. The brain, in its preservation wisdom, simply reduces the volume of everything. It's like when you're at a very noisy party and automatically stop paying attention to individual conversations to avoid being bombarded by excessive information. The problem is that it doesn't distinguish between the suffering we need to avoid and the joy we need to experience. It's a crude solution to a refined problem. It shuts everything down to protect something, but in the process, disconnects us from life itself. Imagine you have a home security system that's so sensitive, it triggers the alarm for any movement, including your own. Eventually, you would be forced to turn off the entire system to have peace, but that would also mean becoming vulnerable to real dangers. This is exactly what happens with our emotional system when it becomes saturated. Protection becomes so comprehensive that it protects us also from the experiences that give life meaning. Kafka described this condition as being trapped trying to reach a castle we can never attain. We can see its towers in the distance. We know something more elevated, more complete, more connected with life exists. But each time we try to approach, we discover new obstacles, new internal bureaucracies that prevent us from getting there. It's as if there existed an internal department of emotional licenses that created so many procedures, so many requirements, so many forms to feel, that we eventually give up trying. He understood that the cruelest bureaucracy isn't that of public agencies or large corporations, but the bureaucracy we install within ourselves, with its protection protocols that end up protecting us also from life itself. This internal bureaucracy functions with perverse logic. To feel joy, you first need to prove you deserve it. Fill out self-esteem forms. Get approval stamps from critical internal voices that never seem satisfied with the documentation presented. To feel sadness, you must demonstrate that the pain is legitimate, that you're not exaggerating, that you have the right to grieve. To feel anger, you must prove that the situation really justifies indignation, that you're not being too sensitive. Eventually, you give up facing this emotional bureaucracy and simply stop trying to feel. It's easier to live on the surface where there are no forms to fill out, where you can function without having to justify each movement of the heart to an internal tribunal that never sleeps. The irony of numbness is that it emerges exactly when we need our emotions to navigate difficult moments. It's as if at the exact moment when we need the emotional GPS to find the way, we discovered the signal is out. You face a crisis at work and can't feel either anxiety or determination, only a strange fog where there should be urgency. You receive good news and can't access joy, as if you were trying to tune into a radio station that only emits static. Someone you love is suffering and you want to help, but it's like trying to embrace through a glass wall. The intention is there. Genuine concern exists somewhere inside you, but the emotional connection has been interrupted. It's particularly cruel because you become a spectator of your own suffering. You know you should be feeling something, but you can't. It's like watching a sad movie knowing you should cry, but your tears are filed in some inaccessible department of the soul. Pedro discovered this during his father's wake. He stood there in front of the casket, surrounded by relatives who wept openly, family members sharing memories, friends offering sincere condolences, and he couldn't find the tears. It wasn't indifference, quite the contrary. Mentally, he knew he was living one of the most painful moments of his life. He intellectually understood the magnitude of the loss. He could even articulate to others how he felt, but his body and soul seemed disconnected from the event. It was like watching his own grief through a documentary about his life. He saw people consoling his external version while his internal version remained incommunicable, locked somewhere even he couldn't reach. During the following months, this disconnection intensified. He functioned perfectly at work, responded to emails efficiently, participated in meetings with relevant contributions. maintained polite conversations with colleagues, fulfilled his social obligations with Swiss precision. But inside there was a persistent sensation of living a borrowed life, as if he were a very competent actor interpreting the role of himself. People praised him for handling it so well, with the loss. But Pedro knew he wasn't handling it, just functioning. There was a crucial difference between processing an experience and simply not being able to access it emotionally. What Kafka understood, and modern psychology confirms, is that emotional numbness is rarely the real problem. It's a symptom of something deeper. Sometimes it's the result of unprocessed trauma that our mind is trying to protect, like a corrupted file that the consciousness operating system can't open. Other times it's the consequence of chronic emotional exhaustion, where we spend so much energy pretending to be well, maintaining appearances, managing others' expectations and our own, that nothing is left to feel authentically. It's like a battery that's been drained by background applications we forgot to close. It can also be a response to a family or professional environment that doesn't offer emotional safety, where we learned that feeling is dangerous, that expressing genuine emotions can result in rejection, criticism, ridicule, or abandonment. We grew up in spaces where our emotions were invalidated, minimized, or used against us, so we developed the ability not to feel as a survival mechanism. Some people discover that numbness began in childhood, when they needed to be the adult in the family, care for emotionally unstable parents, or when they learned that their emotional needs were too inconvenient to be expressed. Others perceive it gradually installed in adult life, result of toxic relationships, soul-draining jobs, or simply the constant pressure of living in a society that values productivity over emotional well-being. Numbness can also be a response to accumulated losses that were never adequately mourned, a series of small griefs that piled up until forming a mountain of unprocessed pain that our mind decided to simply seal and file somewhere inaccessible. There exists a crucial difference between choosing not to feel temporarily and discovering you've lost the capacity to feel. The first is a conscious strategy of self-preservation that can be useful in specific moments. The second is an involuntary state that installs itself surreptitiously and gradually undermines our existential vitality. It's like the difference between deciding to take vacation from emotional life and discovering you were fired from your own heart without receiving notification. The path back to emotional life isn't a linear recovery journey, but a rediscovery process that requires radical patience with oneself. Kafka teaches us that we don't need to fight against numbness as if it were an enemy to be defeated. We need to understand it as a clumsy messenger trying to communicate something important about the limits we've exceeded, the wounds we've ignored, the needs we've denied. Numbness is the way our soul found to say, "Stop, breathe, something here needs to be reviewed." The first stage of emotional reconnection is radical acceptance of the current state. This doesn't mean resignation, but recognition that fighting numbness with guilt and self-criticism only deepens the problem. It's like trying to escape quicksand by struggling. The more you fight against the absence of feelings, the deeper you sink into it. Instead, you need to find solid support points, small experiences that can still touch some non-anesthetized part of your soul. Clara began her journey back to emotions through physical senses. She discovered that even when she couldn't access joy or sadness, she could still distinguish the texture of a leaf between her fingers, the aroma of coffee in the morning, the warmth of sun on her skin during a park walk. These small points of sensory contact became anchors that helped her remember there was still a self in there, even if temporarily disconnected from emotions. She began cataloging these moments of physical presence as evidence that life still pulsed in her, just at a different frequency than she was accustomed to perceiving. Clara created small sensory rituals. Every morning, before any other activity, she spent 5 minutes feeling the texture of the coffee cup in her hands, paying attention to weight, temperature, shape. It wasn't formal meditation, just an attempt to be present in her own body. Gradually, she perceived that these moments of physical presence began creating small cracks in the armor of numbness. Through smell, touch, taste, she was reconnecting with a dimension of human experience that had remained accessible even when emotions became unavailable. It was as if she were using a side entrance to return to her own house when the front door was locked. Numbness often relates to our relationship with time. When we live constantly worried about the future or ruminating the past, We lose the capacity to be present in the moment where emotions really happen. Emotions are phenomena of the present, but if our consciousness is always in another temporal place, it's natural we disconnect from them. Kafka observed how chronic anxiety about the future and persistent guilt about the past created a kind of temporal exile, where it was impossible to fully inhabit the now. Reconnection with emotions also passes through relearning the language of the body. Emotional numbness frequently comes accompanied by bodily disconnection. We stop perceiving the subtle messages the body sends about our emotional states. Sadness that manifests as weight in the chest, joy that expresses as lightness in the shoulders, anger that warms the hands, anxiety that accelerates the heart. When we relearn to listen to these bodily messages, we begin rebuilding the bridge between physical sensation and emotional experience. One of the most liberating discoveries in the emotional reconnection process is understanding we don't need to feel all emotions with the same intensity we felt before. Perhaps numbness taught us something valuable about emotional discernment. Perhaps we can return to feeling with more wisdom, choosing where to invest our emotional energy more consciously. It's not about recovering the capacity to feel everything intensely, but rescuing the capacity to consciously choose what deserves our full emotional presence. You've already felt as if you were living someone else's life, just going through the motions while your true self observes from a safe distance? This sensation of being disconnected from your own emotions, as if they were property of a neighbor you were never introduced to? If you recognize this experience, if you've ever wondered whether it's normal to go days without feeling anything but a persistent emptiness, write in the comments simply, "I want to feel again." You don't need to explain anything more. Those 4 words create a network of mutual recognition among people who share the courage to admit they want to return to fully inhabiting their own lives. The emotional reconnection process isn't a return to the past, but a movement toward a more mature form of feeling. Kafka shows us that numbness can be an invitation to develop a more conscious and less reactive relationship with our emotions. Instead of being victims of our feelings, we can become conscious partners with them. The goal isn't to feel more, but to feel better, with more discernment and authenticity. Roberto discovered this at 42, when he finally decided to seek therapy after his wife gently suggested he seemed absent even when present. For months he had functioned like a well-programmed robot, waking at the right time, executing his professional tasks with exemplary efficiency, maintaining appropriate conversations with colleagues and family, participating in social events with expected sociability, but feeling he was living in black and white in a colorful world. The therapist didn't try to force him to feel, didn't offer miraculous techniques for emotional reconnection, but simply created a safe space where Roberto could explore the emptiness without judgment, where he could talk about feeling nothing without being pressured to improve quickly. Gradually, he began perceiving that numbness had started after a series of losses he had decided to overcome quickly, instead of processing completely. First was his mother's unexpected death, then a promotion that didn't come, then some friends who drifted away, small disappointments he had swallowed and filed efficiently, without realizing he was also filing his capacity to feel. His efficiency in dealing with pain had transformed into an inability to feel anything. Roberto had become the specialist in moving on, without ever stopping to verify if he himself was accompanying this movement. One of the most surprising discoveries in the emotional reconnection process is that we often need to relearn what emotions really are. During the numbness period, our understanding of feelings may have become distorted, superficial, or based on unrealistic expectations about how we should feel. We may have forgotten that sadness isn't just an unpleasant sensation to be avoided at all costs, but a natural and wise response to loss that carries its own wisdom about what really matters to us. That anger isn't just blind destructiveness, but a powerful energy that informs us about our limits and values, about when something needs to be defended or transformed. That joy isn't just a reward for good behavior or external success, but our natural response to beauty, connection, the experience of being truly present. During the numbness period, we may have begun thinking of emotions as inconveniences, as signs of weakness, as problems to be solved quickly. Reconnecting emotionally also means rediscovering that feelings are data, not problems, valuable information about our internal experience and our relationship with the world. Emotional numbness also invites us to examine the messages we received about emotions during our formation. Often we implicitly learned that certain emotions are unacceptable, that expressing feelings is a sign of weakness, that we should be positive all the time. These messages create internal conflict where our emotional nature fights against internalized expectations about how we should be. The result can be a gradual closing of the emotional world as a way to avoid constant self-criticism. Emotional reconnection also passes through redefining our relationship with productivity and functionality. Our society values efficiency and performance so much that we sometimes forget we are emotional beings, not machines. Numbness can be a sign that we've been operating in machine mode for too long, neglecting our basic human need to feel, process, and integrate our experiences emotionally. Kafka reminds us that the human condition is fundamentally absurd, and this includes our relationship with emotions. There's no guaranteed formula for feeling, no instruction manual for emotional life, no timeline for feeling recovery. Accepting this uncertainty is part of the healing process. Perhaps the question isn't, when will I return to feeling normally? But rather, how can I honor where I am now while remaining open to where I can go? Solidarity is a crucial element in the emotional reconnection journey. Discovering that other people went through or are going through the same experience of emptiness can be profoundly healing and liberating. We're not alone in this strange condition of being alive but not feeling we're living, of functioning perfectly on the surface while our emotional life remains inaccessible. There are others walking through this same nebulous territory, others learning to rekindle the emotional light that seemed to have gone out, others discovering that the path back to emotions is both an act of courage and a process of rediscovery. When we share our experience of numbness, we break the additional isolation this condition creates. It's liberating to discover that our difficulty feeling doesn't make us anomalous or defective, but simply human navigating a world that sometimes exceeds our emotional processing capacity. Perhaps the greatest gift emotional numbness can offer us is a deeper understanding of the precious and vulnerable nature of human emotional life. When we temporarily lose access to our feelings, we begin valuing differently each small moment of emotional connection we manage to rescue. It's like someone who temporarily loses sight and then sees each color with an intensity they had never noticed before. Numbness can teach us that emotions aren't guaranteed, that the capacity to feel is a fragile gift that deserves care and conscious attention. If you've made it this far, it's because you recognize in yourself this search for reconnection, this deep and urgent need to return to fully inhabiting your own emotional life, to find the way back home to your own soul. You're not alone in this journey that sometimes seems impossible to travel. In this silent search to rescue the capacity to feel in a world that often punishes sensitivity, this channel exists specifically for those who understand that feeling deeply is both a risk and a precious gift. For those who know that emotional life is something sacred that deserves care, time, patience, and radical compassion. Every week we create a safe and welcoming space where you can explore these existential questions without haste, where your experience of numbness is validated without judgment, where your search for emotional authenticity is honored and seen as an extraordinary act of courage. Subscribe to be part of a community that deeply understands that reconnecting with your own emotions is a revolutionary act of self-compassion in a world that often encourages us to function like efficient machines without ever stopping to really feel what it means to be alive. Together we'll rediscover that being human means accepting both vulnerability and the extraordinary strength that comes from a rich, conscious, and authentic emotional life. A life where each feeling is received as a visitor worthy of respect and attention. Because you deserve much more than simply functioning on autopilot of existence. You deserve to experience the radiant, complex, and deeply satisfying fullness of being truly, completely, courageously alive.